This is my Blu-ray copy of the 1988 anime masterpiece Akira. I love Akira, and I think it's one of the most stunning achievements in animation ever. But I also think, besides my feelings about Akira, this Blu-ray itself is very special because on this dual layer 50GB Blu-ray disc, almost half the capacity is consumed by audio data. And this Blu-ray also came with a little booklet that explains why half this disc is audio. And when I bought this Blu-ray many years ago, this booklet started a little obsession for me. Because as it turns out, the composer for Akira's score, Tsutomu Oohashi, is also a brain scientist. And since his work on Akira, he and his team of scientists have been researching something called the hypersonic effect. Now, the limit of human hearing is generally considered to be somewhere around 20 to 22 kilohertz. Over the years, what Oohashi's team of researchers have done is conducted a series of experiments where they played music for listeners. And sometimes the music was a version that contained very high frequency sound, very high frequency information above 22 kilohertz. And sometimes they would play versions that didn't contain this high frequency sound. And what they found was listeners exhibited more brain activity on EEG scans and expressed a pleasurable perception of higher audio quality when they were exposed to this high resolution music. Now, Oohashi called these changes the hypersonic effect, and here's a paper from 2000. Inaudible high-frequency sounds affect brain activity, hypersonic effect. And because Oohashi wanted everyone to experience the hypersonic effect, he had a custom mixing console built, and he painstakingly oversaw a new mix for the Akira Blu-ray to make sure that all this high-frequency information from the original analog tapes was preserved. And this is why the Akira Blu-ray has 5.1 channels of 192 kilohertz audio at a 24-bit bit depth, so that high-frequency information up to 96 kilohertz can be reproduced from this disc. And in this little booklet that comes with the disc, Oohashi recommends that viewers construct a viewing environment with the right equipment that can reproduce all this high-frequency information that this disc is bursting with. And maybe it's sort of like the placebo effect, but it even feels like this disc is heavier than your normal Blu-ray. When I got this Blu-ray, it put me into a flurry of trying out all the different output sampling rates on my new PS3 and watching the movie at tremendously high volumes, hoping my head would just kind of explode with pleasure from all the high-frequency information. And if you have watched Akira, you know that it is the kind of movie with the kind of score that could make your head explode. Since those younger, more naive times, I've learnt a lot. I've learnt that, for instance, the results that Oohashi found in his original 1991 studies could not be replicated in follow-up studies by NHK laboratories. I've learnt that many studies have been conducted trying to see if listeners can in some way feel or perceive high-frequency audio, and the results have been very mixed. And since Akira's return to the Earth, the audio market has also learned something. The market has learned that if you put a high-resolution sticker on gear, people will pay more for it, even if there has been poor evidence that this sticker isn't bullshit. For me, personally, I came to the conclusion after doing my own volume-matched listening and my own blind tests that in a normal listening environment, most people can't tell lossless from lossy compressed audio apart, let alone higher sampling rates or bit depths. And you can watch some of my many previous videos on this subject where I talk about lossless versus lossy audio. I talk about the importance of double-blind testing. I talk about 24-bit audio. Honestly, and I know some of you agree with me on this, those videos I think have been some of the most important and helpful videos I've made for this channel. Because to me, this question of high resolution audio and this sticker has always struck me as a sort of marketing departments pushing something of dubious benefits to increase product sales, like, say, 3D movies or Valentine's Day. Which brings us to the present day, 2016, where through Tile over at Fidelity, I've learned of an important new AES paper from Joshua D. Reiss of Queen Mary University of London. And this paper is important because it's not just a new study, it's a meta-analysis of 17 studies of high-frequency audio conducted since 1980, including Oohashi's original 1991 study. Now, a meta-analysis is when you go through previous studies about a subject, you investigate them for possible issues or issues of experimental design, and then you gather all the results together to produce a new weighted average which tries to take into account these experimental errors. I've read this paper, and while I can't comment on the quality of the paper or the quality of the analysis because I'm simply not trained in data science, I do know that this kind of work is difficult and it's important. And this kind of work is sometimes undervalued because it's much more exciting to be running experiments than it is doing follow-up studies and statistical analysis of these experiments. The paper is open access and anyone can read it, and I do recommend doing that. I put a link in the description of this video because you can learn all kinds of things about how high-resolution studies have been conducted up until now. But I'll give you the basic breakdown of the results. As I understand it, the takeaway from this meta-analysis is that in all these studies, untrained listeners could identify correctly high-resolution material 51% of the time on average, which is barely better than a coin flip. Now, across studies where listeners were given some kind of training about what to listen for in high-frequency material, trained listeners gave correct answers 62% of the time on average. The number of results from studies with training was much, much smaller than those that had untrained listeners. So overall, trained and untrained listeners together gave correct answers 52% of the time on average. Now, what this meta-analysis suggests is that in experimental listening conditions, with training, people do seem to be able to identify high-frequency material with accuracy slightly higher than chance. And by slightly higher than chance, I mean 62% of the time. Now, if I told you, ladies and gentlemen, I have this amazing psychic ability. I can predict the future, and I'm going to flip this coin 10 times, and 6 out of those 10 times, I can accurately predict if it will be heads or tails. Now, please, I require absolute, total silence. Let's go. I predict heads. Fuck. I think you would agree that 62% in optimal conditions is not very impressive. It's not enough to convince me to fork out more money for high-resolution hardware, especially not in portable listening environments with a lot of background noise. It's not enough to convince me that people who report hearing a huge difference between high-resolution material and standard resolution material, they aren't just listening to different masters, or they aren't just being over-enthusiastic. But at the same time, 62% of the time, it does work 100% of the time. So based on this evidence, you can't outright reject the idea that high-resolution audio may have some kind of effect on listeners. Now, this is an interesting result to me, and I wonder about what kind of training you could do to increase your accuracy in a double-blind test with high-resolution audio. Now, the paper also notes that it seems like this hypersonic effect, if it exists, seems to last for tens of seconds after hearing a high-frequency sample. And this residual effect is something Oohashi noted in his results. So you may get more accurate discrimination results if you listen to longer samples and you leave a longer gap, 30 seconds or more, between samples. You can expect to hear more about this from me in the future, and I'm going to be doing some more listening and some more reading. Here are some other interesting things from this paper. The author states that a possible source of bias in these results may be publication bias, i.e. small studies that do not find a difference between high-resolution audio and standard resolution audio may not be published. This meta-analysis is important, but it's not the be-all and end-all, and the authors recommend that future studies in high-resolution audio be done with changes in experimental design to reduce bias. Now here's the final caveat. None of these studies in this 2016 meta-analysis looked at whether the effects of high-resolution audio could be reproduced with headphones. And Oohashi himself claims that the hypersonic effect requires that the entire body be exposed to high-frequency sound through speakers rather than headphones, suggesting that the mechanism for action for the hypersonic effect, if it does exist, it's actually due to something like bone conduction or something else mysterious. For now, the effects that we have studied, if any, come from using speakers with high-frequency supertweeters. So what are your thoughts? Does 62% sound good to you? Has your faith been shaken? Or are you going to go out and buy a bunch of diamond dome tweeters? Now, I've put links in the description of this video to some of the papers I've mentioned, and I'd love to hear your comments. If you enjoy this video, then why not subscribe and watch my previous videos about sound science. Now, I'll see you next week, and as always, happy listening. I predict heads. What?